"You're not invited to my wedding, Dad, not unless you sign the house over to me first." That's what my son said, his voice flat, like we were haggling over a used car, not 30 years of my life. I stood there in my kitchen, hand trembling around the phone, staring at the worn photo of my late wife on the fridge. I built this home with her. Raised him here. Buried her just a mile from this land. And now, my own flesh and blood was blackmailing me, all for a seat at his own wedding. Before we continue, I'd love to know, where are you watching from today? Comment below. There was a time when my son, Daniel, looked at me like I was the strongest man in the world. He used to follow me around the yard, dragging his tiny plastic rake behind him as I trimmed the hedges. Every Saturday morning, without fail, he'd plop down beside me on the porch steps with 2 mugs, one full of chocolate milk, the other empty, waiting for coffee. He always wanted to match me. Wanted to be me. And I wanted nothing more than to deserve that kind of admiration. Back then, our life was simple. I worked at the auto plant downtown, steady job, long hours, honest pay. My wife, Marjorie, stayed home and ran the household with quiet grace. She had a way of turning routine into ritual. Pancakes every Sunday, no matter how tight the budget. Fresh sheets every Friday, no matter how tired she was. She was soft-spoken, but never passive. Gentle with discipline, fierce with love. Marjorie was the heart of our home. And Daniel adored her. We didn't have much, an old Ford that barely made it up the hill, a lawnmower that coughed more than it cut, and a house that always needed one thing or another. But we were rich in all the ways that mattered. We had each other. Laughter echoed through our halls like music. I remember Daniel's 5th birthday. Marjorie spent days sewing a pirate costume by hand. She made a treasure map, hid little chocolate coins around the yard, and helped him shout, "Aye, Captain," as he ran around in that wobbly hat. I remember standing there, watching them, thinking, this is it. This is what life's supposed to feel like. Those were the good years. When Daniel was 8, I built him a treehouse in the big oak at the back of the yard. Took me weeks. My knees ached, my back protested, but the look on his face when he climbed up that ladder for the first time made every hammer swing worth it. He painted a sign for the front, "Dad and Dan's Fort, no girls allowed." Marjorie just smiled and brought up cookies anyway. As he grew, I stayed involved. Never missed a baseball game, no matter how greasy my hands were from the plant. I taught him to change a tire, balance a checkbook, shake a man's hand like he meant it. We had our share of disagreements, teenagers will always push, but he always came back around. Always apologized. Always hugged me at the end of the night. He used to say, "You and Mom, you're the reason I believe in good people." I held on to that. Even when he left for college, I drove him there myself, my old pickup rattling the whole way. He hugged me longer than I expected when I dropped him off. Told me, "Don't let the house fall apart without me." I told him I'd keep the porch light on. He came back every Thanksgiving. Brought laundry, of course, but he also brought stories. His eyes lit up when he talked about classes, ideas, big plans. I saw ambition in him, but also warmth. He used to call Marjorie once a week just to hear about her garden, ask what she was planting. When Marjorie got sick, pancreatic cancer, fast and cruel, he came home. Took time off work. Sat by her bed every night. Held her hand, whispered to her even when she couldn't respond. He cried in my arms the day she passed. Said, "I don't know how to live in a world without her." I didn't either. We buried her beneath the willow tree behind the house. She'd always loved that spot. After the funeral, Daniel stayed another 2 weeks. We went through her things together, every scarf, every photo, every letter. He handled everything with care. His hands trembled when he held her wedding ring. Mine did too. In those moments, I thought maybe our bond had grown even stronger. But grief is a strange thing. It can either draw people closer, or it can stretch them so far apart they forget how to reach back. That first year without her, he still visited, still called, though a little less often. Then, gradually, it became just Christmases. Then only texts. Then, sometimes, nothing at all. I figured it was just life. People get busy. Work, relationships, the rush of youth. I didn't want to believe it was more than that. I still kept the house exactly the way Marjorie left it. Her favorite chair by the window. Her books on the shelf. The rose bushes she'd planted out front, I trimmed them every spring. I even kept her old slippers under the bed, though I never admitted that out loud. It made me feel like she hadn't really gone. And every so often, when I heard the screen door creak, I'd look up, expecting to see Daniel. But more and more, it wasn't him. And more, I felt like I was waiting for someone who no longer felt the need to come home. The first time I noticed something had changed in Daniel, it was so subtle I almost missed it. He came by for Christmas, just him that year. Said Lila, his new girlfriend, was with her family out west. He brought a bottle of wine, one of those expensive kinds I never cared for, and handed it to me like a business client instead of a son. He gave a quick tour of the house with his eyes. Not like he missed it, more like he was sizing it up. "Still got the same fridge, huh?" he asked, half smirking. I chuckled. "Works just fine." "Yeah," he said. "But, you could probably update a few things. Place is worth more than it looks." That sat funny with me. Not because he was wrong, but because of how he said it. Detached. Like the house wasn't part of us anymore, just a number on a piece of paper. He didn't even ask about the roses Marjorie planted. Didn't walk to her grave like he used to. Just stayed inside, on his phone, talking in hushed tones to Lila in the kitchen when he thought I couldn't hear. At one point, I asked, "Everything all right with you too?" He nodded, but his voice was sharp. "Yeah, fine. Just figuring things out. We've got goals, plans. You know." No, I didn't. Not anymore. That night, I set up the old cot in the den like I always did when he stayed over. But he frowned when he saw it. "You don't have a guest room? This is where you always slept." He hesitated, then said, "Yeah, well. Lila says I should probably get used to hotels now." Hotels. Like my home, his childhood home, was too beneath him now. I didn't say anything. Just nodded and let him go through the motions. Over the next few months, he stopped calling altogether. I'd text. Sometimes he replied, sometimes he didn't. Usually just a thumbs up emoji, or busy, talk soon. Talk soon turned into weeks. Then months. When he did reach out, it was usually about something practical. "Hey Dad, do you still have that old snowblower? Thinking of selling mine. Do you have the paperwork for the truck you gave me? Do you know if the deed to the house is in your name only?" That last one hit me like a brick. I stared at the message for 10 minutes before replying. "Yes." "Why?" He didn't answer. A week later, he called out of the blue. Said he wanted to bring Lila over, to see the place. I thought, finally, maybe this was a step forward. They arrived on a Sunday afternoon. Lila wore heels on my gravel driveway. Looked around like everything smelled off. "Wow," she said, scanning the porch, "this place is rustic." Daniel laughed along with her. I served coffee and pie. Sat across from them, trying to make small talk. She asked how much property I had. How old the roof was. What kind of heating system I used. None of the questions were about memories. None about the family that once filled this space. Finally, I asked, "So, what's the occasion for the visit?" Daniel looked at her. She gave a little nod, like she was giving him permission. "We've been thinking," he started, "once we're married, we want to settle down somewhere quiet. A place with land. You know, roots." I nodded slowly. He went on, "And this house, well, it's already in the family. It makes sense." I set my cup down gently. "Makes sense for what?" "For us," Lila jumped in. "We could renovate it. Start a life here. Maybe even flip it eventually, if the market's right." "Flip it?" I repeated. She shrugged. "Or keep it. Either way, it's an asset, right?" An asset. That's what my life had become to them. Not a home. Not memories. Just square footage and market value. I felt the air go cold in my lungs. Daniel noticed my silence and added, "We just thought, it'd be smart to get everything in order now. Avoid probate later. Maybe sign it over early." There it was. I looked at him, really looked, and for the first time, I didn't see my son. I saw a man who had weighed my usefulness against his future, and found me expendable. Still, I didn't raise my voice. I just said, "I'm not dead yet." Daniel shifted uncomfortably. "Of course not. I didn't mean it like that." But he did. And I knew it. That night, I stood at Marjorie's grave and told her what happened. The wind didn't respond, but I could almost hear her sigh. Not angry. Just tired. I slept in her old chair that night, blanket wrapped around me, wondering where I'd gone wrong. I had given him everything: time, love, shelter, guidance. And yet, it wasn't enough. Or maybe, it had been too much. It happened at my sister's 80th birthday party. A warm afternoon in late spring, with family spread across her backyard like pieces of old furniture, some solid, some faded, some just barely hanging on. Daniel showed up late with Lila. She wore a white linen dress and oversized sunglasses, like she'd been dragged to a barbecue beneath her pay grade. He gave me one of those half hugs. Barely touched my shoulder. I smelled cologne, but not him. I tried to keep the peace. Told him I was glad he came. Asked him how work was going. He answered with one word: busy. Marjorie used to say, "You can tell how someone feels about you by the way they answer the small questions." Daniel's answers that day told me everything. We stood in line for food: paper plates, grilled corn, potato salad. He kept checking his phone. Lila whispered something to him, then they both glanced at me. She smiled politely. He didn't. Then it happened. My niece, bless her curious heart, asked Daniel when the wedding was. He hesitated. "October," he said finally. "Where's the venue?" someone else asked. Daniel looked at Lila, and she answered instead. "Private vineyard upstate. Gorgeous place." Everyone murmured and nodded. Champagne glasses clinked. Someone said, "Oh, Clarence, you must be proud. That'll be a beautiful event." I smiled, nodded, said nothing. Because I hadn't received an invitation. Daniel hadn't mentioned a date. Or a venue. Or anything. I let the moment pass, didn't want to cause a scene. But my stomach had dropped. I knew something was off. I felt it, like a crack in the floorboards beneath me. Later, I cornered him by the edge of the porch steps. "October, huh?" I asked. He blinked, then gave a weak smile. "Yeah, we were going to tell you." "Tell me, or invite me?" He looked away. "Daniel," I said, voice low, "am I going to be at your wedding?" There was a pause. Then he shrugged, casual, like we were talking about a guest list for a company picnic. "That depends," he said. I felt my pulse skip. "On what?" I asked. He cleared his throat. "On whether you're ready to transfer the deed." It landed so flat, so cold, I didn't understand it at first. The deed to the house? He nodded. We've talked about this. You don't need that place anymore, Dad. It's too much for you. And honestly, we can't afford a down payment on something decent. You sitting on that house, it doesn't make sense. So if I don't sign it over, I said, I don't get to watch my only son get married? He didn't answer. Just adjusted his watch. Lila walked over. Everything all right? He turned to her. Yeah, just clearing up some family stuff. She gave me a tight smile. We hope you understand. Weddings are expensive, and we really need to prioritize people who are invested in our future. She actually said that. Invested in our future. I didn't even know how to respond. I walked away. Found a folding chair under a tree and sat there for the rest of the afternoon, sipping lukewarm soda and staring at nothing. Nobody said anything. Nobody followed me. They just let me sit there. Like I was some old man sulking. Like I didn't just get told that my value as a father was tied to square footage and property lines. Later, my sister came over and sat beside me. You okay? She asked gently. I nodded. Just tired. She placed a hand on mine. You don't deserve that. I must have done something wrong, I muttered. No, she said. You just gave too much of yourself. That stuck with me. That night, back home, I didn't turn on the lights. Just sat in the living room, surrounded by shadows and silence. The house creaked, familiar and forgiving. I thought about Marjorie, how she would have handled this. Probably would have said something graceful and firm, the way she always did. She didn't raise Daniel to be like this. Neither of us did. But something had changed in him. Something we hadn't seen coming. Or maybe we did, maybe we just didn't want to admit it. I stood up, walked to the hallway, and opened the old filing cabinet. Pulled out the deed. Stared at it. That piece of paper represented my entire life. Every late shift, every scraped knuckle, every missed vacation, every sacrifice. It was never meant to be leverage. It was supposed to be a legacy. And now, it was a bargaining chip. I slid it back into the folder, locked the cabinet, and stood there for a long time. The house was quiet. But something in me had begun to stir. A few days after that birthday party, I got a call from the local hardware store. Hey Clarence, the guy said, your son was in here. Said he might be taking over your property and wanted pricing on fencing, deck repair, even demo permits. Just wanted to make sure that was legit before we gave him anything on credit. I thanked him, hung up slowly, and sat down at the kitchen table. So that was it. He was already making plans, my son, mapping out how to dismantle my life while I was still sitting in the middle of it. I felt dizzy. Angry, yes, but also hollow. Like the wind had been knocked out of me in slow motion. Later that afternoon, curiosity, and pain, got the better of me. I remembered Daniel once added me to a shared family drive on the computer for photos. I hadn't looked in years. I opened it. There was a folder named New Home Planning. It was public. He must have forgotten to make it private. Inside were PDFs, quotes from contractors. Sketches labeled Proposed Remodel, Clarence's Place. Bullet points like Gut Kitchen, Remove Rose Garden, and one that nearly made me fall out of my chair, Move Dad to Assisted Living, Phase 2. Phase 2. Like I was part of a project plan. There were even links to local facilities. One was half an hour away, cold and impersonal. I clicked through photos, fluorescent lighting, beige walls, vacant faces in wheelchairs watching TV on mute. They hadn't said a word to me. Not a discussion. Not a concern for what I wanted. Just, Phase 2. I closed the laptop and sat with my hands folded, like a child in church. I heard Marjorie's voice in my head. Don't let them decide your story, Clarence. You're not done yet. And suddenly, I saw it clearly, not just neglect. This wasn't a slow drifting apart. This was a plan. A calculated, step-by-step transition where I was no longer a father or a person, just a piece to be moved off the board. I pulled out the old photo albums. Marjorie's handwriting in the margins. Daniel in every frame, birthday cakes, graduation cap, baby teeth missing, arms wrapped around me. And now this? What changed? Or maybe it wasn't change, maybe it was who he had always been, underneath the praise and smiles and gifts. Or maybe it was Lila's influence. But blaming her didn't make it hurt any less. That night, I went to the garage. Dusted off the small tape recorder I hadn't used since Marjorie passed. I started recording everything. My thoughts. My memories. What I saw. What I felt. And I started listening, too. When Daniel came by the next week, said he was just checking in, he left his phone on the counter while taking a call in the backyard. Curiosity got the better of me again. I tapped it. The screen was open to a message thread with Lila. He's dragging his feet. Don't push too hard yet. Once we're married, we'll have more leverage. I still think we should get him to sign before October. Worst case, fake an emergency. I took a photo of the screen with my flip phone. When Daniel came back in, I smiled. Asked him if he wanted some iced tea. He said sure. Talked about the wedding a bit. Nothing personal. Just logistics. When he left, I stood by the screen door, watching him walk back to his car. He didn't look back once. That night, I pulled out Marjorie's journal. I don't know what I was looking for, maybe wisdom, or just her voice. I found an entry dated just weeks before she died. She had scribbled something in her shaky handwriting. If Daniel forgets where he came from, don't remind him with words. Remind him with grace. Grace. I held that word in my heart like a match in the dark. But grace didn't mean weakness. And it didn't mean surrender. It meant doing what was right, even when it hurt. And it was in that moment I decided, I wouldn't beg. I wouldn't yell. I wouldn't hand over my legacy to be stripped for parts and flipped for profit. No. I would observe. Quietly. Carefully. Because this wasn't just about a house. It was about dignity. And Daniel had forgotten mine. Speech balloon. Have you ever felt betrayed by your own family? Let us know in the comments. The next time Daniel visited, I was ready. Not in a dramatic, confrontational way, but quietly. In my own head, I'd crossed the line. Not drawn it. Crossed it. I couldn't pretend anymore. Couldn't ignore the gnawing truth that my son no longer saw me as his father, but as a stubborn old man standing between him and a payday. He pulled up in his new SUV, music thumping, sunglasses on despite the cloudy sky. Lila wasn't with him this time. Maybe she figured I wasn't worth the gas money. I met him on the porch. He didn't even say hello before launching into it. So. I talked to a friend who does estate planning. He says there's no reason to wait. Said we can transfer the house while you're still alive and avoid the tax mess altogether. I studied his face. The way he didn't blink. The way he used "we like it" was a mutual plan. And if I say no? I asked, calmly. He hesitated. A flicker of something in his eyes, annoyance, maybe. Or pity. Dad, come on. You don't need this space. You don't even go upstairs anymore. I go where I please, I replied. It's not safe. And we'd keep the place in the family. That what you told the hardware store? The contractors? That you were keeping it? His jaw tightened. They must have misunderstood. Or you told them exactly what you meant. He crossed his arms. Why are you being so difficult about this? I tilted my head. Because I know what this is about. And it's not family. It's leverage. It's control. He opened his mouth to argue, then shut it. And that silence? That moment of hesitation? That's when I knew. He had nothing to stand on. You've been planning this behind my back, I continued. I've seen the messages. The remodeling plans. The phase 2. You and Lila have already moved me out in your minds. He scoffed. We were trying to take care of you. By pushing me into assisted living? Before I've even had a second heart attack. Now he looked uncomfortable. You're twisting it. No, I said, voice steady, I'm finally seeing it straight. He walked past me, into the house, like he still had a right to it. Looked around like he always did, this time slower. I followed him, let the silence stretch. You remember that table? I asked, pointing at the dining set. He didn't answer. Your mother and I ate our last Thanksgiving dinner there. She barely touched her food, but she still made sure you had extra pie to take home. He looked down. You used to sit on her lap and spill cranberry juice. She never got mad. Just wiped your mouth and said you were her little whirlwind. I stepped closer. And now you want to tear out the kitchen and install granite countertops. He sighed. Dad. Don't. Not today. I saw something shift in him then. Something cold. Resigned. I tried to do this the easy way, he muttered. And just like that, the mask slipped. He turned to leave. You forgot one thing, I said as he opened the door. He looked back. You forgot who I was before I was your father. He frowned. I was a man with a spine. I buried your mother with my own hands, next to a tree we planted together. I worked overtime to pay for your braces. I fixed this house every time it coughed or creaked. And I don't give up what I've earned. Not for guilt. Not for blood. He left without another word. That evening, I walked down the street to Harold's place. Old Navy vet, 2 years older than me but still sharp as a tack. He poured us 2 whiskeys on the porch. Boy trouble? He asked, seeing the look on my face. I nodded. You give him too much? He asked. Everything. He didn't say, I told you so. He just sipped his drink and said, you can love someone and still protect yourself from them. That stuck with me. For days after, I kept going about my business. Watered the garden. Repaired the front step. But something was different inside. A weight had shifted. Then came the envelope. A legal document, delivered by courier. Inside, an early draft of a property transfer agreement. No note. No call. Just blank spaces for my signature. That was the final straw. They weren't just pushing. They were testing how far I'd bend before I broke. So I started making calls. Carol, my late wife's old friend, was a retired estate attorney. She still lived on the edge of town. We hadn't spoken in years, but she remembered Marjorie like it was yesterday. She invited me over for tea. When I told her everything, she didn't flinch. Just nodded and said, let's fix this. And that's when I knew, I wasn't going to be their pawn. I was going to be their lesson. Carol's office smelled like lemon polish and old books. The kind of place where things get done quietly, with dignity. She poured us both tea from a ceramic pot, Earl Grey, steeped just long enough. We sat across a large oak desk. She opened a legal pad and looked at me with those steady, lawyer eyes. Are you sure, Clarence? She asked. I nodded. I've never been more sure of anything. I slid the envelope across the desk. Inside were printed screenshots of Daniel's messages with Lila, copies of the property transfer draft they'd sent me, and notes from our last conversation, word for word, the moment he finally dropped the mask. Carol read in silence. Her mouth tightened at phase 2. After a moment, she closed the folder and said, "Okay." We worked in silence, the pen gliding over paper as she outlined the new terms. First, Daniel was to be removed entirely from my will. No partial shares. No fallback rights. Nothing. Second, if any family member, Daniel, Lila, or otherwise, attempted to contest the will or its contents, the entirety of my estate, including the house, bank accounts, and life insurance, would be transferred to a community foundation I'd named after Marjorie. The Marjorie Ruth Foundation, I said it out loud. It sounded right. I wasn't doing this out of anger. Not anymore. I'd crossed into something deeper than rage. A kind of cold, aching clarity. He wasn't a child anymore. And I wasn't obligated to reward betrayal just because it wore my last name. When we reached the final clause, Carol looked up. "You understand this could sever things permanently." "I think they already did that," I said quietly. She nodded. "Then let's make it official." She prepared a signed copy for her office and one for me. I held the pen for a moment, fingers trembling, not from doubt, but from the weight of it. Then I signed. Each stroke felt like closing a chapter. Afterward, she looked at me with surprising softness. "You're doing this with more grace than most." "I'm not trying to ruin him," I said. "I just can't let him ruin me." I walked out into the afternoon sun, the folder tucked under my arm. The breeze was light, the sky a soft blue, and for the first time in months, I felt something close to calm. Back home, I went into the study. Marjorie's shawl was still draped over the armchair. I placed the documents beside it. Then I sat down, took out the tape recorder, and spoke. "Marjorie. I did it. I protected what we built." I paused. Let the silence settle. "I tried. I gave him every chance. But our house, your garden, they're not for sale." I turned the recorder off. Then I wrote 2 letters. The first was to Daniel. I didn't sugarcoat it. But I didn't lash out, either. I told him what he'd done, how it felt, what it meant, and why I couldn't let it continue. I reminded him of who he used to be, and who I still hoped he could become. But I also made it clear, actions have consequences. And family is not a free pass for cruelty. I sealed it and placed it in the folder. The second letter was to Emily, my granddaughter, Daniel's daughter from a previous relationship. She was 16 now, and the last time we spoke, she gave me a bracelet she made in school. Said it was for grandpas who still read books. I wrote her something different. Gentler. I told her the truth, but with warmth. Told her the door to this house would always be open, for people who came in love, not expectation. Then I called the bank and added the Marjorie Ruth Foundation as a secondary beneficiary. It was done. Later that evening, I poured myself a glass of apple cider, stood on the porch, and watched the sun disappear behind the willow tree. I could almost see Marjorie sitting in the rocking chair beside me, blanket around her shoulders, smiling that sad, knowing smile of hers. "You did what you had to do," she would have said. The next morning, I woke up before sunrise. For once, I didn't feel heavy. I felt ready. Because from that day forward, I wasn't just defending a house, I was defending a legacy. It was a plain white envelope in the mailbox. No return address. Just my name typed neatly on the front, Clarence Allen. I already knew who it was from. Call it intuition. Or maybe it was the faint scent of control that always seemed to follow Daniel's paperwork. Inside was a formal invitation to the wedding. No warm note. No, Dad, or, can't wait to see you. Just instructions on RSVP, attire, arrival time, and seating. Stapled to the back, yes, stapled, was a short message. We hope you'll consider signing the property transfer before the big day. It would mean a lot to start this new chapter with the house already taken care of. Let us know your decision before the 15th, so we can confirm your seat. Daniel. I sat down at the kitchen table and stared at the words until they blurred. No emotion. No acknowledgement of the hurt. Just, leverage. The house I lived in. Slept in. Breathed in. He wanted it on a deadline, tied up in a neat bow for his marriage to someone who saw me as a hurdle to be cleared. I folded the letter slowly. Placed it beside my plate. My hands weren't trembling. That surprised me. I wasn't shocked anymore. I was done. I walked to the back door and looked out at Marjorie's garden. Late summer meant everything was blooming, chaotic and full. The roses had exploded into deep reds and soft pinks, a reminder that life, when cared for, gives back. I whispered, he's not getting it. Not like this. And I meant more than just the house. I meant me. That afternoon, I made 3 calls. One to Carol, just to confirm everything was locked up tight. It was. One to the local pastor who runs the community hall. I told him I'd like to talk about a donation in Marjorie's name. And one to my cousin Martha, who worked part-time catering events. Can you sneak an extra guest into Daniel's wedding? I asked. She laughed. You? Me, I said. Uninvited. That got her attention. Clarence, she said gently, what are you planning? Nothing loud, I told her. But something necessary. She paused. You sure about this? I need them to hear it. From me. In public. No spin. She sighed. All right. I'll get you in. I spent the next few days going through old files, pulling out anything that could back up what I knew, screenshots, copies of texts, contractor quotes with his name, the audio recording of our last conversation. Not for vengeance. For truth. Because the final straw wasn't the letter. Or the property demand. It was the way Daniel erased me with such ease. As if I was a problem he could file away. And if he was going to erase me, I'd make sure the last page he turned had my handwriting all over it. The day of the wedding arrived with heavy skies. Clouds low and gray, like even the weather had its doubts. I wore my navy suit. The one I hadn't touched since Marjorie's funeral. Tied my own tie, slower than I used to, and pinned a small rosebud, cut fresh from the garden, to my lapel. I drove myself. Parked a block away. Walked slowly, cane tapping on the pavement, folder tucked beneath my arm. I arrived just after the ceremony ended. The reception was in full swing, string lights, clinking glasses, and the hum of laughter that hadn't had to earn its place. I found Martha near the bar. She gave me a small nod. Back entrance is open. They won't see you until you want to be seen. I smiled. Thank you. I waited until they handed the mic to Daniel for his speech. He stood tall, confident, one arm around Lila, the other holding a champagne flute. He thanked the guests, the vendors, her parents. Not a word about me. When the room quieted, I stepped forward. My cane echoed slightly on the polished floor. A few heads turned. Then more. Daniel saw me. His eyes widened. His mouth opened, then shut. I didn't raise my voice. Didn't shout. I simply said, I wasn't invited. But I brought a gift. Silence. I held up the folder. Inside this are the reasons you're no longer in my will. Lila took a half step back. Daniel froze. I know about the remodeling plans. The messages. The way you spoke about moving me out. I know everything. Gasps. Whispers. Someone from her side said, "What's he talking about?" I turned to the crowd. This house wasn't just real estate. It was where we held birthdays, where my wife died, where Daniel took his first steps. And now, he tried to exchange all of that for a down payment on convenience. I laid the envelope on the table beside the cake. "Contest the will," I said, "and everything goes to charity. Every cent." Then I looked Daniel in the eye. "You could have had more than a house. You could have had your father." And I walked out. The breeze outside was cool. My chest felt light. I didn't look back. I didn't expect applause. I didn't expect gasps. But what I got, that silence, was louder than anything I'd heard in years. After I spoke, I turned my back on the entire wedding hall, cane tapping slowly across the hardwood, the weight of the folder finally lifted. Behind me, the silence cracked into murmurs. Some whispered. Some gasped. A few called out, "Wait." But I didn't. I kept walking. Outside, the clouds finally split, and a soft drizzle kissed the pavement as I stepped into it. I took off my jacket, let the rain soak through my shirt, and smiled. For the first time in months, the air didn't feel like pressure. It felt like breath. I'd made my stand. And I thought that would be the end of it. But Daniel wasn't finished. The next morning, he showed up. Unannounced. Alone. No Lila. No flowers. No apology in hand. I was on the porch, trimming dead roses with shears I'd sharpened just the night before. I didn't even look up. "You came early," I muttered. He didn't answer right away. Just stood there. "Then, you humiliated me." I set the shears down slowly. "No," I said. "I revealed you. There's a difference." He stepped onto the first porch stair. "You didn't have to do it like that." "And how should I have done it, Daniel?" I turned to face him. "Let you take the house while smiling in a suit at your wedding, pretending we were still a family?" His face was pale, jaw clenched. "You could have come to me." "I did," I said quietly. "More times than I can count." "You embarrassed Lila. You shamed yourself." He looked down, hands in his pockets. "You don't understand what we're dealing with. We've got debts. Her parents expect." I cut him off. "What you're dealing with, Daniel, is the consequence of treating people like obstacles. I'm not a signature. I'm not a burden. I'm your father." He rubbed his eyes. "We didn't think you'd react this way." I took a step closer. "That's the problem. You didn't think at all. Not about me. Not about Mom. Not about what this house means. You just saw numbers. You saw square footage and equity." He didn't respond. The wind moved gently through the rose bushes. The same ones Marjorie had planted, year after year, in every color she could find. She said flowers made people softer. I wasn't sure anymore. "I thought you'd understand," he finally whispered. "Understand what?" I asked. "That I needed help." "You didn't ask for help, Daniel. You demanded property. You gave me an ultimatum to attend your wedding." He blinked. "And I chose myself." We stood in silence for a while. "I never wanted to lose you," he said. "But you were willing to risk it," I replied. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a crumpled envelope. My wedding invitation. The same one with the note about the deed. "I shouldn't have sent that," he said. "No," I agreed. "You shouldn't have." He handed it to me. I didn't take it. "You made your point," I said. "I made mine." This house is not your stepping stone. He nodded slowly, shame heavy on his shoulders. I read your letter, he added. And? He sighed. It hurt. Good, I said. Pain means something's still alive. He looked around. You're really giving it to a foundation? I nodded. The Marjorie Ruth Foundation. Named it after your mother. He smiled faintly. She'd like that. She'd be disappointed in you, I said, more gently than I meant to. He didn't deny it. We stood there, father and son, like two broken fence posts leaning on opposite sides of a gate that no longer opened. I'm sorry, he said at last. I believed him. But I also knew something deeper. He wasn't sorry for the scheme. He was sorry it failed. That was the difference. He turned to leave. Daniel, I said. He paused. Next time you ask someone for something, try offering love instead of leverage. He gave me a quiet nod and walked away, suit wrinkled, shoes dusty, shoulders sunken. And that was it. The confrontation didn't fix anything. It didn't bring us closer. But it cleared the air. And sometimes, that's all you get. That night, I sat in the garden with a blanket over my knees, listening to the wind rustle the bushes, thinking about how loud silence can be between people who used to speak every day. And still, I felt something close to peace. Because I had chosen myself. And this home was still mine. Speech balloon. Do you think the father made the right choice? Comment and don't forget to like and subscribe for more true life stories. The days after the wedding passed like fog. Not heavy. Not light. Just there. I didn't hear from Daniel again, not a call, not a message, not even a forwarded thank you note. The silence, at first, stung sharper than any insult. But slowly, that sting faded into something duller, like a bruise you forget is there until you bump it again. The town, on the other hand, was buzzing. I couldn't walk into the hardware store without someone raising an eyebrow. Couldn't sit at church without whispers behind the hymnals. It wasn't cruel gossip, just quiet curiosity. People didn't ask outright, but their eyes did. Even the mailman lingered a little longer than usual. Heard there was some drama at a wedding, he muttered, slipping letters into my box. Good for you, Clarence. Good for me. Like I'd won something. But truthfully, I didn't feel victorious. I just felt clean. The kind of clean that comes after a storm has finally passed, everything's wet, broken branches still scattered across the lawn, but the air smells honest. I didn't tell anyone the full story. Let them guess. What mattered was what came next. Each morning, I made coffee and sat on the porch, same mug, same chair, same cane leaning against the rail. But the thoughts that filled my head weren't the same. They were clearer. I thought about Marjorie. About the way she'd hum to herself while dusting shelves. About how she'd kiss her fingers and press them to the photos of her mother. About the way she always looked out the window a little longer than necessary, like she was saying hello to someone only she could see. I felt closer to her now than I had in years. One morning, while trimming the roses, I found a tiny bloom, so small it looked like it had been shy to show itself. I crouched down, knelt on the soil, and just stared at it. That little bloom had no idea about drama. No knowledge of betrayal or property or inheritance. It just grew, because that's what it was meant to do. That same day, a knock came at the door. It was Harold, my neighbor and friend of over 30 years, holding a plastic container of chicken pot pie. Figured you could use something warm, he said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. We sat at the table and ate like we used to when Marjorie was still alive. No music. No TV. Just fork clinks and the occasional grunt of approval. You're not wrong, you know, Harold said between bites. About what? About drawing the line. I didn't say anything. He took another bite. You teach people how to treat you, Clarence. Even your own kids. He didn't mean it as comfort. Just a fact. After he left, I cleaned the dishes and took a slow walk down the lane. My legs weren't what they used to be, but the fresh air made me feel human. As I walked, I saw a familiar figure sitting on the swing set at the old park, Emily, my granddaughter. I hadn't seen her since before the wedding. Her hair was longer now, her shoes kicked off in the grass, her phone beside her untouched. She looked up and smiled when she saw me. "Grandpa," she said softly. I walked over and sat on the bench beside her. "Your dad know you're here?" I asked. She shrugged. "Probably not." We sat in silence for a while. Finally, she said, "I heard what happened." I waited. "They said you ruined the wedding," she added, eyes on her hands. "And what do you think?" I asked. She glanced up. "I think you told the truth." That hit deeper than I expected. "I missed you," I said. "I missed you too." She reached into her bag and pulled out a small box. Inside was the bracelet she made me years ago, worn, the beads faded, the string fraying. "I thought maybe you forgot about this," she said. "I never did," I whispered. She placed it back in my hand. "Mom says you're giving the house away," she added. "Not quite," I said. "I'm giving it to people who'll love it." She nodded. "I want to help," she said, surprising me. "With what?" "With whatever you're doing next." I looked at her, the same eyes her father once had, before they became too busy, too sharp, too hungry. And I realized, not all ties had to be severed. Some just needed to be rerouted. I walked her back to her mom's car, and as she waved goodbye, I felt something I hadn't felt in weeks. Hope. The kind that blooms quietly, like a shy rose. Back at home, I sat in Marjorie's chair and stared at the wall of family photos. So many faces. So many chapters. And I thought, the silence that came after Daniel's betrayal wasn't empty. It was a pause. A chance to decide what comes next. And this time, I would choose. It started with a voice. Soft, familiar, tucked somewhere between memory and morning light. I was sitting in the kitchen, stirring oatmeal, the radio murmuring in the background, when I heard it, Marjorie's voice. Not in the air, but in my head, clear as crystal, "Don't let this house die with you." I set the spoon down. The room felt still. Not empty, just waiting. That day, I took out a notepad and wrote 4 words at the top: "What can this become?" I stared at them for a long time. This house wasn't just a building. It was stories. Walls soaked in laughter, heartbreak, forgiveness. It had fed dozens, sheltered more. It had strength, foundation not just in stone, but in love. So I started dreaming again. Not small, fearful dreams of survival, but wide, generous ones. The next day, I walked down to the town's old community center. Spoke with Janet, the director, a woman with silver hair, a spine of steel, and a heart that never gave up on lost causes. "I want to donate space," I told her. "My house. Or at least part of it." She blinked. "For what?" "For people who need rest. Veterans. Seniors. Folks down on their luck. A place that feels like home, not a facility." She leaned back in her chair, arms crossed, but her eyes softened. "You serious, Clarence?" "Dead serious." That set things in motion. We started with paperwork, zoning, taxes, permits. Carol helped navigate the legal weeds. The Marjorie Ruth Foundation now had a mission: to turn this house into a short-term boarding home for veterans and aging neighbors who needed community and care without feeling institutionalized. It wasn't easy. I called contractors, real ones this time. Not the vultures Daniel had lined up. I told them I wanted the house updated, but not sterilized. Keep the bones, I said. People need to feel the history here. Some laughed. Some nodded. One young guy, Marco, offered to do the front porch repairs at half price after hearing the story. Word started spreading. The town that had once whispered about the wedding now buzzed with something new: admiration, curiosity, even support. Martha dropped off extra linens. Harold donated a recliner from his den. The church pitched in with volunteers. I hadn't felt this alive in years. I started waking up with purpose again, early mornings filled with emails and measurements and coffee shared with contractors instead of silence. The house changed, slowly. Marjorie's garden was trimmed and expanded, walkways added for wheelchairs. Her roses were replanted in raised beds. We converted 2 rooms upstairs into suites, each one painted in soft earth tones, no blinding whites, no cold tile. I kept her rocking chair in the common room. Some nights, I sat there just to feel her again. Emily came by twice a week after school. She helped paint, organize files, design flyers for the grand opening. She never talked about Daniel unless I asked, and I didn't. Not yet. One afternoon, as we were organizing books for the common room, she held up an old copy of The Grapes of Wrath and said, "Grandma wrote in this." I opened it, and sure enough, there it was, Marjorie's handwriting in the margins: "Everyone deserves dignity, even in dust." Emily read it out loud and whispered, "She really was something, huh?" "She was everything," I replied. We shared a smile, no sadness, just warmth. The day the sign went up, Marjorie's house, a place to rest, a place to rise, I stood on the porch and took it all in. The renovations were almost done. The team was planning a small opening ceremony. Janet had arranged for a few veterans to tour the space the following week. Volunteers signed up for cooking, gardening, and light cleaning. A local artist donated paintings for the walls. And through it all, not a word from Daniel. But I didn't need one. Because this plan, this dream, wasn't built out of spite. It was built from the pieces he left behind. The parts of me that refused to be discarded. The house was filled with footsteps again. Laughter. Plans. Not the echo of a man waiting to be erased. And every night, before bed, I walked through the halls, touching door frames, checking window locks, straightening pillows, just like Marjorie used to. Because this wasn't just healing. It was homecoming. Not for Daniel. Not anymore. But for everyone who still believed in love without strings. For people who didn't ask, "What can I get?" but instead, "What can I give?" Marjorie's house was alive again. And so was I. The first guest arrived on a Monday morning, early, quiet, with nothing but a duffel bag and a limp in his left leg. His name was Thomas. Navy vet. 72. Said he'd been sleeping in his truck for the last 2 months after a housing voucher fell through. Janet brought him in, introduced us, then left us alone in the foyer. "This used to be your house?" he asked. I nodded. "Still is, in a way. Now it's yours too." He looked around slowly. "Feels like a place somebody loved." "They did," I said. "Two somebodies, actually." He didn't say much more. Just gave me a quiet nod and carried his bag up to the room we'd painted blue and cream. By the end of the week, there were 3 more. A widow named Esther who lost her apartment to rising rent. A kind but quiet man named Ray, fresh out of the hospital, nowhere to go. And Gloria, 60, sharp-tongued, funny as hell, who brought a kitten in her purse and told us, "Don't worry, he's neutered." Unlike my ex. The house filled quickly, not with noise, but with life. Mornings began with fresh coffee, shared breakfast, and old songs on the radio. Sometimes we sat together, sometimes not. No one was forced. No one watched the clock. The rules were simple: respect the space, and respect each other. And somehow, everyone did. It amazed me how people who had so little left still found a way to give, folding towels, weeding the garden, helping each other down the stairs. There was no hierarchy here. Just people, surviving together. Emily started spending even more time around the house. She baked banana bread with Esther, helped Gloria write a resume, and got Ray to laugh so hard one afternoon he nearly spilled his tea. I saw her bloom here, too. Not just as a granddaughter, but as a young woman with heart. One evening, I found her sitting alone on the back porch, staring out at the willow tree. "You okay?" I asked. She nodded. I wish Dad could see this." I sat down beside her. "He wouldn't understand," she added, "but maybe he would've, once." I didn't reply. I didn't need to. We watched the sun dip below the trees. Eventually, she leaned her head on my shoulder. "I feel closer to Grandma here than I do at home," she whispered. "So do I." From the living room, laughter erupted, Gloria making another sarcastic remark, "Probably." The kitten darted past us, chasing a moth. "This is what family feels like," Emily said. "People showing up. People staying." She didn't say it, but we both felt the contrast. Daniel hadn't shown up. He hadn't stayed. Not once. And strangely, I no longer needed him to. Because real family, I'd come to learn, wasn't just blood. It was presence. It was care. It was people who saw you, not for what you had, but for who you were. The next week, we hosted our first community dinner. Nothing fancy. Just soup, cornbread, and peach cobbler. But every seat at the long dining table was filled. Volunteers. Guests. Neighbors who used to cross the street to avoid awkward conversations now brought warm trays and genuine smiles. Someone made a toast. I don't remember who. But what I do remember was the warmth in my chest, the unmistakable, marrow-deep feeling of belonging. Not as a patriarch. Not as a provider. Just as a man, finally surrounded by people who chose him not for convenience, but for connection. After dinner, I stood by the photo wall we'd made, old snapshots of Marjorie, wedding photos, Daniel's baby picture, and now, a growing collage of new memories, Thomas with a chessboard, Esther in her apron, Emily and Gloria dancing barefoot in the hallway. One photo stood out. It was the treehouse. Faded. Worn edges. Daniel had painted a crooked little sign, "Dad and Dan's Fort, no girls allowed." I stared at it for a long time. I didn't take it down. I just moved it slightly, further down the wall. That night, I sat in Marjorie's chair with the fire crackling and a blanket over my knees. I looked around the room, not just at what had changed, but at what remained. And I realized. I hadn't lost a family. I had simply grown into a new one. One that knew the value of showing up. One that didn't need a title to be loyal. One that honored the past, but didn't demand the future as payment. Marjorie's house was no longer a monument. It was a miracle. It was a Thursday afternoon, warm for early fall. I was folding towels in the common room, sunlight spilling through the window, when I heard the gravel crunch outside. Footsteps on the porch. Heavy. Hesitant. I glanced out the window. Daniel. He looked different. Thinner. Jacket too loose on his shoulders. No Lila. No flashy car. Just him, standing there with nothing in his hands but a quiet kind of shame. I didn't move right away. Part of me wondered if he'd knock, or just walk away. He knocked. 3 soft taps. Like he wasn't sure he was allowed to. I opened the door. We stared at each other for a moment. "Can I come in?" he asked. I stepped aside. He glanced around the room, taking in the changes, the chairs rearranged, the soft music playing, the smell of stew drifting in from the kitchen. I didn't recognize it at first, he said. The house. It's still the same under the paint. He nodded. I led him to the porch. We sat on the steps, just like we used to when he was a boy. The silence stretched between us, not hostile, just tired. I heard about what you did with the place, he said finally. You say that like it's past tense. He gave a faint smile. Fair. I guess I meant. I saw the article in the local paper. Didn't think you read those. Lila left. There it was. Not said for pity. Just a fact. A punctuation in his story. She wanted someone with ambition. Someone who didn't get publicly shamed at their wedding. I raised an eyebrow. You didn't get shamed. You got revealed. He chuckled, but it died quickly. I deserved it, he said. All of it. I didn't answer. I was angry after, he went on. At you, at myself. I kept telling myself you overreacted. That you made me the villain. He looked down at his hands. But I've had time to think. That's rare these days, I said quietly. He nodded. I kept hearing Emily talk about the house. About you. Said it felt like Grandma was still here. Said people were better here. She's right, I said. I miss that feeling, he whispered. We sat in silence. Then he pulled something from his coat pocket. Small. Wrapped in tissue. He handed it to me without a word. Inside was Marjorie's locket. Gold, simple, with a tiny photo of the three of us inside, faded from time, but still clear. I found it in a box, he said. Didn't know I still had it. I turned it over in my hands, thumb tracing the etching on the back, love is loyalty in silence. Marjorie's words. Her favorite quote. I closed it gently. Thank you, I said. He looked away, blinking quickly. I don't expect anything, he said after a moment. I know I burned the bridge. No, I said. You tried to sell it. He winced. But, I added, you're here now. And that counts for something. He nodded. You can come visit, I said. No promises, no expectations. Just, show up. He turned to me, a mix of hope and regret in his eyes. Even after everything? I'm not handing you keys, Daniel. But I'm also not locking the door. His shoulders dropped, a breath released like he'd been holding it for years. We sat there for a long while, watching the sun fall behind the willow tree. Before he left, I walked him to the gate. Tell Emily I said hello, I said. I will. He started to turn, then stopped. I still don't know why I did it, he admitted. Why I let it all get that far. You forgot who you were, I said. And maybe who I was, too. He nodded. Then he did something I hadn't expected, he reached out and hugged me. Not tight. Not desperate. Just a quiet, human hug. And I let him. When he walked away, I didn't cry. I didn't smile. I just stood there, locket in hand, feeling the weight of a son who finally saw the damage he'd done. Not all wounds need to be reopened to be acknowledged. And not all stories need to end with reconciliation. Some just end with understanding. And that's enough. Speech balloon: was the father too harsh, or finally fair? Let us know in the comments. The ribbon fluttered in the wind, pinned between two wooden posts, freshly painted white. Emily held one end, Janet the other. I stood in the middle, holding a pair of oversized scissors someone from the church had insisted we borrow, for the photos. The front yard was full. Dozens of neighbors, volunteers, veterans, and a handful of townsfolk who once avoided eye contact with me in the produce aisle now stood clapping and smiling. Esther had baked pies. Gloria was chasing her cat away from the punch bowl. Ray brought folding chairs from the firehouse. The sign above the door gleamed under the sun. Marjorie's house. A place to rest. A place to rise. I cut the ribbon. Applause broke out, not thunderous, but warm. Familiar. Like a choir of voices that all knew the same quiet pain, and still chose to sing. Inside, the walls were filled with photos. Not just old family portraits anymore, but new ones, volunteers planting in the garden, Thomas teaching chess to a teenager who stopped by after school, Gloria grinning with flour on her face. The kitchen smelled like cinnamon and home. We gave tours, shared stories, laughed in the hallways. At one point, I caught a glimpse of Marjorie's rocking chair through the window, bathed in afternoon light. I imagined her there, soft smile, eyes gleaming, proud but never boastful. Later that evening, after the last guest had gone and the last pie tin was wrapped in foil, I sat on the porch with Emily. She handed me a scrapbook she'd made, filled with before and after photos of the house, handwritten notes from the guests, pressed flowers from the garden. At the end, there was a page titled Letters to Grandma. Each guest had written something to Marjorie, thanking her, even though they'd never met her. Esther wrote, "Your spirit lives in the warmth here." Ray wrote, "This is the first place I've slept without fear in a decade." Thomas wrote, "I never knew you, but I feel like I do now. Thank you for giving us a second chance." I couldn't speak. Emily placed her hand on mine. "She's still here," she said. "You kept her here." I opened the locket Daniel returned and placed it beside the scrapbook. Marjorie's tiny, faded photo looked up at me. I whispered, "We did it, love." Because we had. This home had survived more than weather, more than termites and repairs and market evaluations. It had survived betrayal, grief, loneliness. And it had become something stronger. Not a place for bloodlines and entitlement. But a sanctuary. A legacy. I kept thinking back to the word Marjorie had once used, grace. Not loud. Not easy. But constant. A quiet determination to live with dignity, even when others try to take it from you. Marjorie's house stood because of that grace. Daniel never contested the will. He didn't try to fight the foundation or claim anything. I don't know if it was guilt, shame, or just acceptance, but in the end, he let go. Maybe one day we'll speak again. Maybe not. But I'm not waiting anymore. I have guests to check on. Gardens to water. Grandchildren to teach how to make Marjorie's biscuits. People still drop by. Sometimes just to chat. Sometimes to cry. No one leaves without a warm drink or a listening ear. That was the real inheritance. Not the bricks. Not the land. But the love that filled it. And now it fills others. This house once held a family. Now it holds a village. And every time someone walks through that door and says, "It feels good in here," I know exactly why. Because Marjorie never really left. She just made room for more.